Are we rolling? Yes, we are. What's up, guys? It's your boy McKinley Crain here, and today I'm going to be doing my spoiler-free review of Season 1, Episode 4 of the most recent Disney Plus Marvel series, which is WandaVision. So, this episode once again stars Elizabeth Olsen as Wanda Maximoff, aka Scarlet Witch, and Paul Bettany as Vision. But the thing is, Wanda and Vision are actually only in this episode for around 4 minutes. Because this episode is not really centered on Wanda and Vision. Well, it is, but it's centered on it's technically centered on what's going on with Wanda and Vision, but it's told from other characters' perspectives for most of the time, except for the last 4 to 6 minutes, which is told from Wanda and Vision's perspective. And this episode also stars a lot of other people and characters, actors as characters, because a lot of this episode is like I said, told from different characters' perspectives. We have this episode also stars Teyonah Parris as Monica, who was in the previous episode, was a big character in the previous episode, in episode 3, but she's an even bigger character in this episode. For the first 10 to 15 minutes, Monica is the main character of this episode. This episode is told from her point of view, and then later it's told from different people's point of view, different characters' points of view, which are two different characters. One is not Kat Dennings, that's the actress. One is Darcy Lewis, who's played by Kat Dennings, and the other is Jimmy Woo, who's played by Randall Park. And Darcy Lewis, if you don't know, is not a new character. She has a bigger role in this episode than she usually has had in the previous MCU installments or whatever. So she was originally from the first 2 Thor movies. She was from Thor and Thor: The Dark World, and she was this sarcastic side character. She was a sarcastic side character, a comic relief almost. And she, this is kind of a reprise or whatever for her, because I haven't really seen her in anything MCU related since Thor: The Dark World. Yeah, but in this one, she's one of the main characters, and she works for S.W.O.R.D. If you don't know who S.W.O.R.D. is, that's probably because you haven't seen this episode, or you just don't read the Marvel comics, I guess. The Marvel comic books, or you're not familiar with Marvel comic history. S.W.O.R.D. is basically kind of like S.H.I.E.L.D. It's S.H.I.E.L.D.'s brother organization, sibling organization. It's kind of so S.H.I.E.L.D. basically is the bigger organization. Why am I saying organization? I don't know if they're organizations or not. The bigger foundation, the bigger foundation that monitors a lot of stuff on the land and stuff. But S.W.O.R.D. Sword is like almost as big as Shield, but like Sword like monitors a lot of like stuff that happens in space, and a lot of like a lot of different stuff relating to like space, and just stuff relating to what's going on with like Wanda and Vision's case. So basically, yeah, Darcy Lewis and Jimmy Woo are like both agents of Sword who are investigating like Wanda and Vision's like whole little like situation, like where they're stuck in a sitcom. And this episode is kind of a prequel, but it's like a prequel the way Lion King 1.5 is to The Lion King. If you've never seen the Lion King movies, you probably don't know what I'm talking about, but Lion King 1.5, like a lot of it takes place at the same time as like the first movie does. It's just told from a different character's point of view. And that's kind of what's happening here. It's like a lot of the stuff in this episode takes place during the time periods of like the previous episodes, but like a lot of it takes place like before the previous episodes. So it's not really like a prequel, but it's like a semi prequel, if you know what I mean. And it's like told from different characters' perspectives. And this episode is like, it's like a break. It's like a change of, this episode was like a change of character, like from the other episodes. It's like, well, how do I say this? It's like very different from the other episodes. The previous episodes, it has a very different kind of tone. It still has like a lot of the same tone as the previous episodes, and like just feelings. It's the previous episodes, but like when I say feelings, I mean atmosphere, like the atmosphere of like the episode, and the feelings that like the person watching the episodes feels like, you know what I'm saying, like the mood. But it has, but it mostly has like a kind of a different tone. And the thing about this episode is a lot of the mysteries and questions from past episodes that like everybody was trying to figure out are answered in this episode. Most of them are very unpredictable. Some of them I had already figured out when I was watching previous episodes, but that's just because I was very observant, and I'm good at figuring out like like twists and stuff like that in movies and TV shows. Like for most of the time I can figure out a lot of twists. Some of the time I can't, but most of the time I can figure out a lot of twists and turns and stuff like that. Yeah, so I had already figured out like some of like the big twists and turns in this episode, because when I was watching previous episodes, because I was very observant, and I was just like, wait, so what's the most logical reason for this? What's this little segment of the episode trying to tell us? Stuff like that. And there's also some stuff in this episode that's revealed that like I didn't exactly like I thought it could be that way, but like I wasn't entirely sure that it was that way. I was just like, what if it's like this? It might be like this, but there are other like options for what it could be, like that kind of thing that was revealed in this episode. And this episode was just perfect. It was just a perfect episode of a perfect show, and I loved it. This was the best episode so far, although all the episodes are perfect and great, just like this one. This one was my favorite. This episode, it's hard to classify, like, it's really hard to classify, like, what genre, like, what TV genre this episode is, because, it's like, it's not like the traditional, like, it doesn't have the traditional, like, sitcom-y feel of the previous episodes, because, you know, if it's not, like, it doesn't take place in a sitcom. It's got, like, some sitcom stuff in it, and, like, you know, there are a couple moments that do take place in, like, you know, WandaVision's, like, whole sitcom reality thing or whatever they're in. But, like, you know, remember how, like, when the first two episodes came out and everybody saw them and said that there was, like, no action in them? So, like, that's kind of like, you know, this episode kind of broke that little pattern or whatever, a chain, because there is a little bit of action in this episode. There is some action in this episode, but, you know, there's also a lot of, like, drama in this episode, and there's even, like, you know, a few, like, flat out, like, horror themes in this episode, like, little moments that, like, you know, are, like, just flat out, like, horror inspired, like, you know, like, little horror moments, like, it's, like, just moments of, like, horror, like, oh my gosh, it's like, am I watching a horror show? And, you know, we got a few of those, and, like, everybody, we have, like, a few of those, and, like, we've had a few of those in, like, the past 3 episodes, but, like, you know, there are even, like, there are more of those moments, and there are more of those moments, of those little, like, horror moments in this episode. And, you know, this episode is, you know, this whole series is mostly very lighthearted, although it can get dark at times. But, like, you know, this episode is actually, like, very dark, if you think about it. It's lighthearted. It can be lighthearted. It could be, like, in the middle, like, not really lighthearted, but not really dark. But it can also be very dark at times. Like, oh my gosh, like, it's like, there are these little, like, because, you know, like, a lot of, like, the dark stuff has to deal with, like, the reveals. And, you know, it's like, not only is, like, the whole tone of some of those reveals just dark, but, like, you know, if you just, like, think about what's going on in the show in your mind, you're just like, oh my gosh, that's dark. But it works. It all works. I loved this episode. It was a perfect episode. It's got great acting. It's got great writing, it's got a great story. It's got great reveals. It's very cleverly written. The reviews are very clever. Not the reviews. The reveals in this episode are very clever, and they're very, like, you know, they make a lot of sense. It's like, they're just very cleverly written, and, you know, they make sense. And they're supposed to make sense, too. You know, like, a lot of, like, if you watch, like, a lot of mystery shows or mystery movies, you know, like, you'll eventually watch a few where, like, there will be, like, reveals, like, and twists and stuff like that are supposed to confuse you, like the ones from the movie Tenet. Well, most of these reveals are supposed to make sense, and they do. A few are supposed to confuse you a little bit, and they do. But, like, you know, most of these reveals make sense, and they're great. In this episode, we also get, like, a darker side of Wanda, aka Scarlet Witch, like, that we've never seen before. It's, like, a really dark side of her. Even though she's, like, barely in this episode. Well, her character is barely in this episode. Well, not her character, but what, like, you know, her character is, like, technically all over this episode. She's just not, like, the main character in a lot of this episode. Like, she's the main character of this episode for the last 6 minutes, meaning that, like, you know, the story is told from her and Vision's perspective in, like, the last 6 minutes. But, you know, she's not, like, the main character in most of this episode, if that makes sense. Like, they talk about her, the characters talk about her a lot in this episode. The plot has to do with her and Vision, but, like, She's not the main character for most of this episode. Neither is Vision. This episode was just awesome, and I can't wait to see more of this series. And I love this episode, and I think that I can't wait to see what comes next. And I think this series is going to, like, introduce a lot more, like, Marvel stuff into the MCU, if you know what I mean. Like, a lot more new stuff. Like, it's already done that. It's already, like, introduced Sword into the Marvel Universe, but I think there's a lot more to come. And I love this episode. It was just great. It was just thrilling. I couldn't stop watching. It was like, kept me at the edge of my seat, even though I was lying down for most of the time. I was watching this episode on my bed. I was watching this episode on my phone while I was lying down on my bed. This series and this overall series and this overall episode are very impressive and are an awesome start to the MCU, to the fourth phase of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and are just perfect in every way. And they have, this episode has perfect chemistry, perfect character chemistry, perfect dialogue, perfect twists and turns, perfect. It's got a perfect story. It's got perfect everything. The action scenes in this episode are perfect. This episode does have a little bit of comedy. It's got a lot less comedy than the past 3 episodes have had. The past 3 episodes are, if you think about it, kind of like their whole genre is comedy. But this episode has a lot less comedy than the previous 3 episodes have, but it has a little bit of comedy, and the comedy, aka the humor in this episode, works. And I can't wait to see more. Anyway, I'm gonna give this episode a 100% out of a 100%, which is the equivalent of an A+. Before I go, tell me down below in the comments, if you've seen this episode, what you thought of it. Did you like it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Did you mildly dislike it? Did you think it was okay? And also tell me how shocked you were. Like, how shocked you were, like, when they revealed, how shocked and surprised you were when, this episode, revealed a lot of stuff about, what was going on in the show and what was going on in the past episodes. Were you shocked? Were you, horrified? Were you I knew it? What'd you think? Tell me down in the comments down below. Anyway, subscribe, join the notification squad. I will return.